Hello, everyone. I am pleased to bring you our fireside chat on the future of networking with Vlad Novakovski, CEO and co-founder of Lunchclub.ai. Vlad, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Again, good to see you, Nicole.
Good to see you. And we were just talking about virtual background. So I'm pleased to have the Lunch Club virtual background here, which you can all find by visiting lunchclub.ai. And there you can see more information. But really excited to deep dive into this with Vlad today. So let's first start with brief introductions. I think it would be helpful just for people to have some context on who we are and what we do. So with that, I'm Nicole Quinn. I'm a general partner at Lightspeed Venture Partners. Lightspeed is a multi-stage VC firm with offices across the world. We actually have 9 offices globally and about 10 billion assets under management. So we invest predominantly in consumer, enterprise, and healthcare. I'm focused on early stage consumer, which of course is how I know Vlad. We were very fortunate to lead Lunch Club's recent and very competitive Series A round. I was about 39 weeks pregnant when I met Vlad, and so we moved quickly with conviction on this round, and we're thrilled we did. So I will, before I hand over to Vlad, actually, I thought it might be interesting just for me to mention the fact that both Vlad and I were born and grew up in Europe. I did in England and Vlad did in Russia. So Vlad, tell us a little bit more about your background.
Great. Thanks so much, Nicole. Yeah, so as Nicole said, I am originally from Russia. Funny enough, I think last week we were talking about chess and the Queen's Gambit and things like that. So actually, like a lot of kids growing up in Russia, I was exposed to that. Unfortunately, I was last place at our chess club. But some of the things I did a little bit better on were things like math and computer science and physics. So I did a lot of that growing up, and got to meet a lot of really interesting people, around the world through those kinds of events. And I think that probably for me laid the groundwork for some of what we're building at Lunch Club, as far as people from different parts of the world, like-minded people coming together and having conversations and making new connections. So but as for me, I spent part of my career, in Wall Street, before that academia, and then the last 8+ years working in Silicon Valley on startups, and so was fortunate enough to kind of be part of a few different communities where making connections is very important to the success of those communities as well. And for the last 3 years, we've been, working on Lunch Club, and obviously this year has been a very interesting year for us, and so we can dive more into that. But that's a little bit of background just on me and how I started thinking about these kinds of problems.
By the way, for everybody listening, I have to share with you, because I'm British, I love people who are self-deprecating in this world. And Vlad is no exception there. When Vlad said that he used to do math, what he means is that he was one of the top mathematicians in Russia and the US, competed internationally in many competitions. And it's part of that skill, super skill, I would say, that has gone into the really smart algorithm that you see behind lunchclub.ai today. And you're going to hear more about this later. So Vlad, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about Lunch Club. What is it? How does it work?
Yeah, so Lunch Club is simply, a platform for people to make new professional connections, on a weekly basis. So we know what our users' goals are, kind of long-term as well as short-term goals, what their interests are, and basically in kind of a data-driven way, we make one-on-one connections between our users. That's the core use case. So, for example, somebody might meet their co-founder on Lunch Club, or somebody might have an interesting conversation about the topic they're starting to learn, or in our case, we've actually met 3 people that have joined our team, our own team, through Lunch Club. So, and the one-on-one, we feel like the kind of meaningful one-on-one connections are kind of at the core of networking. And but there's not really a platform, or there hadn't been when we started, that actually does that well, right? I think that there are a lot of other platforms that work well for kind of very, very targeted searches, or if your goal is to read a lot of content, or there are a lot of other things that you can do on the internet. But as far as like meaningful one-on-one connections that actually lead to something, we wanted to build something that that can really bring a lot of value there. And so initially the platform was in-person meetings, and so for the first 2 years we started with a small group of users in the Soma neighborhood in San Francisco, and kind of launched kind of neighborhood by neighborhood, city by city, and the matching that we do. So one core thing about Lunchclub is that it's not something where you can go in and request to meet a particular person. Now, of course, you can tell us information about the kinds of people you would like to meet, or the kinds of topics you're interested in, or things like that. But at the end of the day, we actually make the matches. And so because of that, it's not, it makes it, it's not transactional. The other person doesn't feel like, you specifically sought them out, for, a transactional reason, but more like this is just a meeting of the minds. Two people that should know each other are going to have a conversation, and hopefully most of the time good things will come out of that.
Good things certainly do come out of that. I find it interesting sometimes when a friend knows you better than you know yourself. When I'm using the Lunchclub product, I often think Lunchclub knows me better than I know myself. And you introduce me to people who I think are more relevant connections that I would be able to meet in, a conference or just everyday networking. So I'm very grateful as a user as well. So listen, from an investor perspective, you guys were already growing steadily before the pandemic, as you mentioned, as a way to arrange in-person meetings. When COVID hit, it made IRL meetings pretty impossible. You then very quickly added on video meetings to your toolkit. And that's when things really accelerated. It was exactly the platform people needed at a very critical time. So Vlad, tell us about how the pandemic changed things, both for Lunchclub and also for the broader networking and event space as you see it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, very broadly speaking, right, I think a lot of things that, a lot of innovations that were probably already likely to happen in the course of years or decades, got, accelerated through the pandemic. And so, for us, for example, video was certainly on our roadmap. At the time, when we thought about it, it was like, well, we have our in-person meetings, and then eventually we want Lunchclub to be accessible by everyone in the world. So, at some point we should build video capability. So we thought about it, but we probably weren't really going to build it until like a year later, right? And it wasn't the top priority. And then as soon as we saw what was going on, with the pandemic, we realized that we need to accelerate kind of switching from in-person to video. And I mean, it was very fast. I mean, I think we went from not sure we should do that at all to kind of saying, okay, well, let's have, half of our users, let's A/B test video, and, let's have half of our users be able to opt into in-person meetings and half of our users video. We went from that kind of thinking, and then, kind of 2 weeks later, 100% of our users were on video. And thankfully we didn't, because it was pretty scary. I mean, beyond just the pandemic itself, but for us as a business, it was a pretty scary time because we had no idea that people's behaviors would carry over to video. I mean, I think there were a lot of views that, well, maybe the magic of the in-person connection just doesn't carry over, and then in that case it wouldn't have. We didn't have a very this was basically the only way we could still do matching using an algorithm, right? But if that hadn't worked, the future of the business would have been in trouble. So it was a pretty scary time for us, but we just, the team kind of, was able to quickly execute. And we were, like I said, within 2 weeks, we were able to get everyone over to the video format. What we've seen is that this format actually, kind of all things considered, works better where there's no commute. There's, people, I think one of the things that's happened is that people are just more comfortable with video as the initial format for a meeting now. So, it's true that, there's certainly value from the in-person interactions, but the first interaction doesn't have to be. I mean, I think that's the key. One of the key learnings for us is like, you can still figure out if, a new connection is something that really makes sense and, adds value to both people. You can figure that out quite well over video. And then later, you can kind of follow up. I mean, obviously during the lockdown, it would continue over video, but, some of our users, as even, as things eased up a little bit in like June or July, they would still prefer to have the initial meeting over video and then later, do socially distanced walk or things like that. So I think another thing that was really interesting to see is just how quickly, kind of the industries and, businesses moved over, both just from Lunchclub perspective, but also just like a lot of conferencing platforms quickly emerged. And just in general, it seems like the economy, the economy is a lot more resilient, or certainly the information economy is a lot more resilient than maybe, I think, back in, March, I think it was, people were pretty afraid about what would happen to the information economy in general, right? And then how quickly, people were able to adapt and businesses were able to adapt, I think kind of speaks to the power of the internet and to the power of innovation.
Yeah, I say that the consumer behaviors that are built up at the moment during this pandemic will be sticky afterwards. And so you're absolutely right. We have Lunchclub in terms of the future of networking. We have all these different virtual conferencing websites. And so, I think it will go back to a hybrid, but it's certainly a step change. It's definitely accelerated those trends. So shifting gears, one of the things that makes Lunchclub so special is the algorithm. This is an algorithm that took Vlad and his co-founder Scott years to build and perfect to get to the product that you see today. So Vlad, tell us a little bit about the algorithm, and can you really recreate the magic of an in-person networking online?
Yeah, I mean, right. So our algorithm, is one where we make the matches, and so that has to work pretty well. It makes it a lot easier for the user, right? Where you don't have to like look at a lot of different choices or go back and forth. We just, you sign up for a time and then we make the match and you're in a conversation with somebody. But, for that to work, the matching has to be really good. And so, yeah, we have spent a lot of time iterating on that. One of the things that's been interesting is, there's a lot of data on the internet. And so even when we started out and, had almost no data of our own, there's a lot of data that informs kind of what makes good matches. For example, data on platforms like Twitter. And so, relevance and the kind of mutual value, right, I think is really important to our algorithm. So it's not like, one person really wants to meet someone and like bugs them and finally they they take a quick meeting. It's more like both people are getting value from the conversation. So we basically, there's a lot of data on the internet. There's a lot of data that our users provide, and then now that we ourselves have made at this point, many hundreds of thousands of matches, that we now know kind of things that work well, that maybe weren't obvious as well. And so, one of the things that's interesting is that, for matching algorithms to work, you need some amount of exploration. Like if you only make the obvious matches, then it'll never, if you kind of play it safe and never take any risks, right, and only make the obvious matches, then you'll never have the amazing matches. So you kind of, so there's from this kind of risk reward perspective. And so so the ideal status, I think, is something where like 80% of the matches are really good, and then the other ones are okay, maybe it's just a conversation that could be interesting, but nothing much comes out of it, right? And so what's interesting about that is, like, in the video world, that actually works better, right? Because if somebody, if 80% of your matches are good, but and 20% are okay, then, and you're going to a coffee shop, like, if you go to a coffee shop and you wait in line and spend an hour, and the conversation is only okay, like, that's not a very good experience. And whereas for the video format, the downside, if in the cases where the matches aren't great, like, it's pretty easy to wrap up a call fairly quickly, and there's no commute time. So it, actually, what that means is it allows us to experiment more with the algorithm and higher, like, achieve higher reward from the really good matches, because we can afford to take some risks, because the ones that don't work out, there's not much cost relative to the in-person. So I think that's actually one way in which the matching algorithm evolved that maybe is a little bit nuanced after we switched to video. I mean, the other thing that maybe is that is we've seen is that just global, right? Like, because it's video, there's no local, we're not bound by any local neighborhood. So just, the best possible match we can make globally certainly is better than the best possible match we could make within, local to, neighborhood of London or San Francisco.
Well, I personally love the international nature of it, given I'm in London today and still able to do my lunch club meetings. We actually just got an audience question that is along these same lines. So the question is, what sets Lunch Club apart from the other big tech competitors such as LinkedIn? So if LinkedIn were to build a similar feature and deliver one-on-one AI-based networking product, like, what would that look like? What sets you guys apart? I personally believe that it is your algorithm, and it is the years that you spent perfecting this algorithm that sets you apart, but would love to throw that question to you, Vlad.
Right. I mean, I think that with something like that, the way we think about it is like, our, like, a lot of it is the algorithm and just our focus on it, right? I mean, the kind of larger companies for which this is not the focus, it's just harder to innovate. I mean, when they have like a core product that they're already focusing on, and kind of the whole innovators dilemma sort of thing. But I think beyond that, for us, there's also kind of the philosophy of where it's not transactional, right? And it's we enable matches that are mutual value. So you can never, like, we think about all of our features in the sense that of like, we'd love to know as much as possible about each of our users, but then at the end of the day, we make the matches. And so I think that philosophy, it's pretty hard to like recreate that if you already have a product that has a different philosophy. So I think if you have kind of the existing social network products where you can where the main thing is like adding people you already know to your network, and then some people use that even if they don't know the person, and in hopes of getting to know them. But like, you can't have this dichotomy where you can do that, but then also you can request new connections. That just kind of gets messy, right? So you kind of need a coherent product philosophy, I think, for that to work. And so for us, like, because we started with this philosophy where it's like general networking, mutual value, not transactional, like our view is that the best the best outcomes actually happen when, when the right people are connected, and then they kind of figure it out from there, as opposed to coming in with an agenda. And so, so I think recreating that within the context of an existing product that already has behaviors that are more like agenda based or transactional based, which, there's room in the world obviously for those behaviors. We actually think that, a lot of these things can coexist and work well together.
I definitely agree there. There's something that I'd love to discuss, which is around consumer behavior. As you know, I obsess over marketing, brand, and consumer behavior. I find that, human behavior behind networking is fascinating, because there are so many different motivations behind why people network. So maybe you can tell us about how the user behavior at Lunchclub has meaningfully changed in the early days of the pandemic versus now, sort of 9 months in. Anything surprising or unexpected for you?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say now what was expected. We were kind of, moving so quickly to get, building new features. It's a little bit hard to remember now what was expected and what wasn't. But I can tell you the things now, kind of looking back, that that have shifted right from the earlier days of the pandemic to now. So I think in the earlier days, the way people thought about it was more like, like recreating the analog version. So it's like, well, I used to have meetings in the coffee shop, Blue Bottle Coffee in Soma. Now I'm gonna basically meeting with the same people I would have met there, but over video, right? So the idea of like global matches was actually not something that our users thought about. They just wanted a digital version of the local matches we were giving them before, right? And I think now people are actually much more comfortable with global, global connections. And so, because we still give our users an option to, if they prefer a local connection, we try our best to make, a strong kind of local connection. But the percentage of people who request that has kind of steadily gone down over time. And I think that kind of speaks to kind of, the future of work is more global than it used to be. I guess another thing is like different industries have, what it used to be that for us, in the cities where we have a lot of users, like most of those users were in tech, regardless of what city it is, right? But that's changed over the last few months, where now, if you look at a city like London or Los Angeles or Paris, like most of our users in those cities are, I mean, we still have people from, the tech community, of course, but most of the users in each city now corresponds to the kind of the industries that existed in those cities historically, right? So whether it's entertainment or finance, healthcare. So basically, people from a lot of other industries have now been have gotten much more comfortable adopting like new ways of networking, which was like in the early days of the pandemic, that wasn't yet the case. And yeah, I think that's basically, I think, some of the shifts we've seen. There's a little bit, I mean, there's starting to be a little bit of like a fatigue. And so I think for, because there are just so many different things that just in terms of overall, like with conferences and different, events. So I think from our perspective, it's like, we don't need, we don't encourage our users to overwhelm themselves, right? If you can meet 1 or 2 interesting people a week and make that a habit, like that's, and then from time to time do more, as to, depending on, your goals, do more in-depth things. I think that's kind of, I think, where the hybrid is going to be, which maybe, I guess I can pause there, but.
I definitely agree with you on the hybrid. Okay, so just briefly, we have an interesting audience question where they're asking what business scenarios could benefit the most from using Lunchclub and create the future monetization opportunities for you.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely want to, be able to provide value to many different industries and many different use cases. Certainly, we've seen a lot of outcomes happen, right? Whether it's hiring, whether it's investing. We've talked to some major investment firms that have made not one but like 3, 4, 5, 6 investments over Lunchclub. We've talked to companies that have hired, again, not even just one but several people through our platform. We've seen companies got started because of Lunchclub. We've seen a lot of entertainment projects got started. But I guess our philosophy for now is kind of like, let's let 1,000 flowers bloom, right? Like, let's see what value is created globally across Lunchclub. And I suspect that new business models will emerge over time as well that we might not even be able to predict right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's why it's been great working with the Lightspeed, Nicole and the Lightspeed team as well, because having partners who are supportive of kind of taking a longer term view of let's create a new way for people to network, and we'll kind of see where the value creation is there, and leave things open that way, as opposed to saying, okay, well, let's really just focus on this one vertical right now.
Yep, that makes a ton of sense. Now, Vlad, at at Lightspeed, sometimes I feel like I work at Lunchclub. At Lightspeed, we believe that virtual meetings, virtual conferences, and other remote events will be an essential part of how we conduct business going forward in this new world. We also believe that the habits that we build up now will be sticky after this pandemic. So in your eyes, what does the future of networking look like? Will it be a hybrid? Will meeting IRL come back once we have the vaccine mass adopted? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've seen happen is people are just much more comfortable with having, an initial conversation happen over video. And so I think my view is that that's going to stay. Certainly follow-up conversations or more kind of targeted discussions happening in person. I think that's going to come back, right? Or I think both in terms of networking or just in terms of the future of work in general, like there's still going to be like team offsites, right? Or if people, if you meet someone who's a potential co-founder, certainly you're going to sit down with that person at some point and do kind of a more in-depth conversation. But I think general networking happening over video, just because of the advantages it offers with the global aspect of it, and not having the cost of commute and things like that, like and from what we're seeing, that's not, I don't think that's going away, right? I mean, I think general networking will stay in large part virtual. I do think a lot of kind of like more in-depth sessions between people who already know each other, or have a very concrete thing that they're working on. I think that a lot of that will come back to be in real life. And so one way to think about Lunchclub is that it's like a never-ending conference that kind of anyone can join whenever they have time to, right? And so you whenever you come in, you kind of always meet someone relevant to you and your interests.
Love that. We have 1 minute left, so I'm going to do a quick fire round. Best podcast you've listened to this year?
I haven't had a lot of time to listen to podcasts. Before this year, I liked Masters of Scale a lot, though. I would definitely recommend that one.
Best book you read?
I really like Michael Ovitz's book, Who is Michael Ovitz? That one I think is great for anybody who's looking at entrepreneurship.
Love that one. And he is also a big fan of Lunchclub. Craziest networking story?
Yeah, we had well, that's one thing that we missed. When the meetings were in person, there were a lot more like these like stories that sound like that are just hard to believe. Like we had one match that we made where the people ended up talking for 7 hours, and actually they had coffee and then they went to see a movie and then ended up talking more, and I think ended up starting some kind of new blockchain project together. But so
Wow.
we've seen a lot of those kinds of stories when it was in person. I think maybe when we were introduced that we'll see stuff like that again.
That's awesome. And then last quick question, best advice you've ever received for all the entrepreneurs listening?
Well, I think, kind of at the meta level, there's this thing of like having the right advisors in your corner, but then also knowing who to ask, kind of, who to ask for what type of advice. I mean, I think that's actually been really helpful because, especially when you're very early stage, like everyone is trying to weigh in and, you kind of figuring out, okay, well, like, how do you kind of build the right network of, it's kind of like, like a personal board of directors or, something like that, right? When you're very early stage and just like figuring out like who to turn to for different types of advice. I feel like that's been a really helpful framework to think about.
Well said. Vlad, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun doing this with you.
Thank you. And thanks for having us.